Welcome to The Value Script, the podcast where we bring value every episode for the everyday person. I'm your host, Lonnie Carmichael, accompanied by my wonderful wife, Meredith. And we are going to continue today with our episode with Rayne Gray from Fireground Fitness. Rayne, I learned something listening to Fireground Fitness about you.
Okay.
You're Canadian.
Oh boy, what did I say? Yeah. Yeah, that's right, eh?
and all Canadians are nice.
I like to think so. I have a tendency to be.
That was interesting. You were interviewing was the fire chief of the Alameda County Fire Department.
Oh, Heather. Yeah.
That was fantastic.
That was a good episode. Great. Yeah.
But she was Canadian too, I guess, apparently. And so I didn't realize that's all Canadians are nice. It's kind of
your takeaway.
Never met a mean one. But so how did you go from being in Canada to become a Marine?
Yeah, that's a big jump, isn't it? So my parents were from California, and they ran away to get married when they were young, at 18, 19 years old. They got married and settled in Vancouver, British Columbia. So I spent most of my childhood there until I was about 11, and my parents divorced, and my dad moved to Toronto, and I went and lived with my dad in Toronto for a handful of years. And then moved back to live with my mother in Vancouver. And then she said, you know what? I have no reason to stay here in Vancouver. I'm going to go live close to family. So she moved back to Los Angeles, and so did I. So my junior year of high school landed back in California, landed in California, the first time for me. And then as I was coming up with I was not a very good student in high school. I was all about socializing and playing sports. And academia was not something that was strongly encouraged in our household. Wasn't supported very well, and so wasn't a big deal. And so I was scraping my way through high school, and everybody I was surrounded by was going off to college, and I was like, well, I got to come up with a plan. And one day, the Marine Corps recruiter comes waltzing across campus, and I was like, I have a plan.
Really?
And and that was it. It was sort of default program. I'm like, oh, okay, well, this guy's got a plan for me, and I think that'll work. And it seems pretty cool. Everyone else is going to college. That seems like a respectable thing to do. And I saw it as an opportunity for me to grow a little bit and to learn. And then, of course, there's the added benefits of GI Bill and money for college, which was something that I felt that we did not have. Mm-hmm. I didn't have anybody who really could tell me anything otherwise, right? Well, here's how you do student loans or anything like that. Right. There's nobody sharing that information with me. So I was like, or I couldn't hear it if they did.
Well, and maybe for your benefit too, right? I mean, maybe that's for the best.
Well, when I reflect back, it was 100% the best thing that I could have ever done. I was, like I said, not a good student. If I'd have gone off to college, it would not have been a good scenario. I needed to do some growing up. And, interestingly, went into the Marine Corps and started that pipeline of growth and development. And then I met my, soon-to-be wife, and she said, she moved from Arizona to California. She took a job as a nanny, and her objective was right out of high school, I'm going to get residency in California and go to school. And she's like, probably going to go work my way through to my PhD and have a family and go from there. And then we met, fell in love, and I ruined all those plans. So we ended up stationed at 29 Palms, California as a young married couple. And if you know anything about 29 Palms, California, it is far away from everything. But there was a little community college, the College of the Desert. Huh. And so while I was on field operations and training and doing all that stuff, my wife went to school and basically exhausted the course catalog at the College of the Desert. And then my 4 years was up, and we're like, okay, time to go. And so, so that's how I ended up in the Marine Corps, and kind of where that path went. Yeah.
29 Palms has an in and out, doesn't it?
It may now, but back in those days. Oh. So I'll tell you a funny story. When I first went out there was nothing. And halfway through our final 2 years in the Marine Corps, they put in a McDonald's. Okay. And the line was around the block because, man, people were so excited to finally have something like that.
Wow. Yeah, it was paramount for me because between here and the beach, when I was in high school, was 20, through 29 Palms. And we would always stop at the In-N-Out. And so that's why that was so paramount in my mind. And we would also stop on the way back, even if we had just eaten In-N-Out in other parts of California.
Are you thinking of 29 Palm? Are you thinking of Palm Desert, like Palm Springs?
Yeah.
No. So 29.
That's why Palm's different.
No. 29 Palms. So that's Palm Springs is awesome. Then you go north. And there's a mountain range, and over that mountain range, in the high desert up there, is 29 Palms. It is a desert wasteland.
So what I'm seeing is the sign for it on the freeway, thinking I'm in the place.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's 29 Palms this way to the dark side of the moon. Now, what I will say, it is an amazing training center for Marines. Right, Desert Warfare Training Center. You don't get a better place to go train. However, it is a long way from anything hospitable.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Well,
I guess awful.
Helps display my ignorance in the state of California.
Well, there you go. So no In-N-Out burger, not even close.
How did you make the transition from Marine to fire? And is that a natural progression?
Well, interestingly, I mean, yes and no. I think there's the idea of wanting to work with my hands, wanting to be outdoors, but also be a service to the community was a big part of what drew me into the fire service. But it took me a minute to figure that out. And I look back in my life and there was all these signposts that I completely missed, right? One of my good friends in high school, his dad was an LA City firefighter. And, he told us a little bit about the job, but just a little bit. And then when I was in the Marine Corps, I met this guy who was one of my platoon sergeants when I was in the Marine Corps was volunteering with the Yucca Valley Fire Department. And so he comes in one day and he's telling us all about this event they had. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Let's go run, right? We're going to go do Marine Corps stuff and sort of put that out of my mind. And when I was 17, I had an event where a friend of mine and I rescued this little girl from a house fire. Oh, wow. But again, put it out of my mind, right? Like that was not about a job you could go do. It was just these things that were peripheral to my life. And I get out of the Marine Corps and I did construction for a little while. I start going to school and I start working retail and just working and putting my way through school. And then a friend of mine leaves. We were working at REI. Are you familiar with REI? Uh-huh. Yeah, it's my favorite place. We're working at REI. And this friend of mine gets hired by the Tempe Fire Department. And I was like, wait a minute, that's a real job? There's benefits and pay, like that's a real thing? And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh yeah, LA City, oh yeah, Sergeant Flores in the Marine Corps. Like these guys that were peripheral to me, suddenly it all came about. And so when I started exploring what the job was about, I'm like, oh, you get to use your brain. You got to be smart. You get to use your body. You got to be physically robust. You get to serve the community. You have to be a caring, compassionate, thoughtful human being. Like, this is a cool job. And you get paid to do that. You get paid to serve in that way. And I was in. And so I started down that road and, it took me about 6 months to land a job and I got hired out in Sun City West was my first stop in my career. I spent just over 3 years there, and then I took a job with the city of Phoenix and spent the next 22 years there.
So I want to go back to something you said. When you were 17,
yeah,
you and a friend saved a child from a burning. Were you guys just walking on the street and thought, that might be cool if we go in that burning building?
Yeah, kind of like that. So I'll tell you the story. So Nick and I, it was Christmas Eve. This should tell you a little bit about who we were as knuckleheads, right? It was our senior year of high school and football season was over, but track season was coming. And so Christmas Eve, we say, hey, let's go for a run. So we go out for a run and we're cruising through our neighborhood and it's dark out, probably about 7 p.m. And we're climbing this hill in our neighborhood. And as we're pretty much to the top of the hill and it crests and it tees into another street. And we hear an explosion and, glass breaking. And I look at Nick and he looks at me and we run different directions. And as we're running, he goes to one side of the street and I go to the other and we're pounding on doors and fire, there's a fire. And at the end of the street, we can see fire rolling out of the second story window of this 2-story house. Wow. And so we pound on a couple of doors. We meet at the front of this house and there's a little boy about 8 or 9 years old standing there staring up at the fire. So I grab this kid and I go, hey, is there anybody in the house? And he's like, yeah, my dad's in the house. And so Nick and I, without talking to one another, just beeline down the side yard, hop a pool fence onto the back patio, open up the sliding glass door and walk into somebody's house. And it was imagine burnt toast like throughout the house. And when you burn bacon a little bit, right, it just fills with this light smoke. So the whole downstairs was filled with this light haze of smoke. And I vividly remember the smoke detector beeping, and the TV was on like Jerry Springer or something like that. Like the television was on, and I walk into this person's kitchen from the back patio and scream into their house, "Is there anybody in here?" No response. And so Nick and I are screaming out loud and we're running around the bottom of this house, and we arrive. He goes one way and I go the other, and we end at the stairs. And I go about 3 steps up the stairs, and my head reaches the floor level of the second story. Now all the hot gases have filled the upstairs and banked down, and we're pressing down into the staircase. And so my head reaches that floor level, and my face immediately feels like it's going to burn off. Wow. And so I run back down the stairs, and Nick hands me a wet washcloth, because everybody knows that wet washcloth will protect you from smoke inhalation. That is not fact. That is folly. I'm just saying that sarcastically because we were 17 years old. What do we know? Right? So I take that and put it over my face. I take 3 steps up again. I'm like, this isn't working. And so we run back downstairs, and Nick and I, we were defeated. We were going to head back out the way we went. And Nick passed out, went out the door. And as I reached the threshold of the sliding glass door, there's a door. I see it in my peripheral vision that I had not checked. And I feel compelled to go check that door. So I throw open the door, and it's like a little guest bathroom, like a little tub shower combo, sink, and a wall. And I can see the front edge of a toilet. And you remember, we're looking for a grown man. And I scream into this small bathroom, this like 6x10 bathroom, "Is there anybody in here?" No response. But I feel compelled to go all the way. So I go all the way in, and I look, and there's a toilet, and curled up next to the toilet, huddled up, is a 3-year-old girl. And so I snatch her and throw under my arm like a football, run out the back door, hurdle the back pool fence, and run out to the street, set her down next to her brother. Now the neighborhood's full of people. And I look at Nick, and we just run right back in. So we go back in, we get to the base of the stairs, and I'm like, we didn't exchange words during any of this. We're just like, what do we do? Like, there's nothing we can be done. And all of a sudden the door blasts open, and this giant firefighter steps in and says a few choice words, followed by "Get out." And we're like, that tracks. That's probably what we should do. And so Nick and I leave, and so we go out there, and we get interviewed by the media, we get interviewed by the police, and all these different people talk to us, and we go home, and that's that, right? Now we end up in the paper, local boys rescue girl, and knowing what I know now, that kid could not have been in a safer place. She was very remote from the fire, behind a hollow core door. Fire department was 10 seconds away, right? She was totally fine. However, we get back to school after Christmas break, and everyone's like, "You guys are heroes." And Nick and I are like, yeah, we're heroes. But we found out that father, who the kid was saying was in the house, was trapped in an upstairs bathroom, and he died of smoke inhalation that evening. The mom was doing last minute Christmas shopping like you do every Christmas, right, out there. And this kid was kind of left unattended for a few minutes, and the little boy lit the curtains on fire and caused all this. And like all things, right, it takes years sometimes to understand the impact. And for many, many years, I received a Christmas card from that mom thanking Nick and I for saving her daughter's life. And as I was like, we didn't do anything. We didn't really do anything. But I came to realize that the importance of that act was just that, right? We're hurtling by one another at 1,000,000 miles a minute. Every day we're on the highways, hurtling past people without a care in the world. But a human being stopping and taking a moment to engage with another human being is the most important thing we can do. And I realized that mom was so grateful that somebody, even 2 dumb knuckleheads who didn't really know what they were doing, were willing to act. That's it, just act. And whether that act was the right thing to do, or it even it was the appropriate steps to take, right? We did something. We made a choice, and we chose to act for and on behalf of her family. And what better thing could you do for somebody? And so as I reflected on that over the years, I was like, this is about human beings connecting with other human beings. And then when I got on the fire department, I started reflecting on that story and that event in my life. And then I was like, oh, this is why this matters. Service to your fellow man matters.
Yeah.
And so as I got into my career in the fire service, I'm like, oh, I need to be the best, most capable, smartest as I can be firefighter so that I can show up and deliver service to anybody who calls for whatever they're calling for. And that became the cornerstone of my career when I think about that event.
That's incredible. So many great talking points, but I think the most profound that really resonated with me is there's a lot of times when tragedy strikes, a lot of it revolves around this when tragedy strikes and there's something really negative happens and everybody that cares about these people is kind of looking around like, what do we do? I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what to do.
Yeah.
You know what you do? You show up, you take action, right? Like you give of yourself in the best way you can. Mm-hmm. And the worst thing you can do is nothing. But sometimes I think we get paralyzed by the situation. And so many times, regretfully, more times than I wish would have happened in my life, I didn't do anything. Yeah. And I hated that feeling. And so not wanting to ever feel that again, I forced myself to do something, even if I don't know what to do. Pick up the phone, go see somebody, do something, right? Take action. And even though it's imperfect action, it's still the perfect it's the perfect what I got for right now.
Yeah.
Even though it's imperfect in the overall sense of what should have been done. I love that.
So a few years ago, 2017, my dad passed away, my brother passed away. And a week later, my dad passed away. And it was I had never had any death in my family that was so close to me. And I did not know how that was going to go. Right. And I found myself in bed for about 72 hours.
Oh, wow.
Just paralyzed going, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do with all these emotions I'm feeling. And what was really interesting to me was my phone exploded, right? Text messages, Facebook messages, blah, 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 all of that. And what I realized was it was the people don't know what to do when it's uncomfortable to reach out to someone when they're in this place that you can't necessarily connect to. So, but what I realized was these folks were just trying to say, hey, I see you and I feel that you're in pain and I'm here for you. That's it. And of course, there's like hey man, if there's anything you need, and of course, what I really need, like make me a lasagna, right? What do I really need? But it wasn't that I didn't really need anything. There's nothing anyone can do to remove that pain. They can't take the pain away from you, but they can say, hey, I see you and I know you're hurting and I'm here for that. I'm just here to sit next to you while you're hurting. I get it. It sucks. There's nothing I can do to make this any better. It's only time, distance, and shielding that eventually wears, the grief wears away over time. It never goes away completely. It just becomes a little bit less. And so when friends just reach out and go, hey, that's awful. That's it. I love you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's all you can do.
It's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it is powerful because like you said, like physically, there's really not a lot, know, that somebody can do, but just knowing that people are there, and they love you and want to support.
Yeah. And, I heard a story about a friend whose husband passed away and the firefighter just showed up and just out there mowing the lawn. And she's like, hey, okay.
Yeah.
And he's like, listen, I don't know what to do, so I'm just mowing your lawn.
Wow.
Saw
a need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I think that our ability, when we talk about this last episode, right? So getting out of yourself and thinking about other people and just saying, well, it's not always about me. It's what's the bigger picture here, and how do I connect with other people? It's a deliberate act. Because we're always very myopic and selfish in our lives a lot of the time. So stopping and saying, okay, hold on, what's really going on here? And how can I affect change for other people? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And we have to constantly re-engage with that and ask that question.
And have relentless forward progress as our goal.
Right.
Right.
I like it. Way to connect.
I like your little catchphrase. It's freaking awesome. So you brought up too a couple of things. One, as a fireman and being in the fire service, as I've talked with my cousins and friends that are in similar careers, they talk about a lot of really horrible things they see. How do you deal with that?
That's a good question.
How do you not let that prevent you from running into the building next time or or wondering if there's going to be a 5-day-old bloated person stuck to the toilet that you're running into, and how do you know?
Yeah. So first of all, those things, you are going to see the most awful things. I heard a stat the other day. They said the average person sees about 3 deceased persons in their lifetime. Public safety personnel typically see about 800.
800.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was like, "Ooh, wow, yeah." And then I start, as they say that, I'm like rattling through the catalog, the Rolodex of different things I've seen in my lifetime or in my career. And I'm like, oh, and then all the various ways that people die. The word that comes to mind is amazing. I don't mean that in a positive way. I just mean it's the way that the fragility of the human body and the way that people get killed. It's phenomenal to me. The variety of things that happen to people. It's quite crazy. So for me, I think about that little girl. I think about the father, and I say, okay, well, here's the thing. Every day around the world, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of horrible things are happening. And so they're going to happen whether I am having an opportunity to impact it or not. And so I show up trained and making sure that my skills are beyond reproach so that I can do whatever's possible. And if it gets beyond me and it is not their time, or it is their time and they're going to go and I've done everything I can do, that's okay. But what troubles me is when we show up and I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot how to do X, how to calculate a drug or how to do a skill or whatever. That's unacceptable, right? That I could not live with. But knowing, hey, my skills are on point, and when I show up, I can have an impact, or maybe not. Maybe they're gone.
Right.
And that's just the way it is because life's tough and fragile.
I love that though. You bring up that point where my skills, as long as my skills are beyond reproach,
yeah,
as you show up. And I think as we show up for our own lives, a lot of times we are faced with disappointment. And a lot of times really it's because my skills are not beyond reproach. I need to refine this to create these outcomes better over here. Or at least that when I face with these horrible outcomes, I at least know I did actually give it my all.
Yeah.
Versus being like, dang, I really didn't have my all to give.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that.
And I will say, I say that I had it all figured out. No, there were times when I'm like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. And I mean that I'm caught and I'm like, oh, and I'm like, I haven't thought about drug algorithms for a PEDS code in a long time. And on the way to the incident, I'm like working through working through my pocket cards to like make sure that I remember my doses. Right. But if fall back on hey, PEDS code, hey, we're here as a team. I will say, hey, I don't remember the calc for epi. Help me out here. Let's get the Broslow tape out. That's so having the humility to say, hey, I don't know, but sometimes our ego can trap us, right? And I would hate to go back to the station and let my ego get the best of me and something bad happens to somebody because I wasn't willing to subjugate my ego. I wasn't willing to say, hey, I'm a little unclear on something. Instead, I hope no one sees this, right?
That's huge.
Oh, sorry. I was going to bring up because he brought up how do you deal with certain situations? Yeah. And my uncle was, I don't know if it was Yolo County or Sacramento, but he was the police chief, firefighter chief down there. And he had seen countless things happen and was able to push through. But he had to take time off for a leave of absence because he took one wrong turn during this incident, and it added like 3 minutes to the drive, and something had happened at the incident. And so then he blamed himself.
Yeah.
And so how do you combat something like that?
Well, so let me say this. The mental health concerns are real. And that this idea that, hey, I'm just going to show, that's how I process this. But I will tell you, there was a day I had, and this was late in my career. It was like the last 5 years. I had a really tough shift, super sleep deprived. One of my crews had a PEDS code. It was really bad. And I'm driving home, exhausted and depleted. And all of a sudden I was just flooded with emotion and flooded with all the calls as I'm driving past. I'm like, oh, I remember this street. I remember this incident and that incident, and completely flooded with this indelible traumas that have written their mark on my soul. And I went home and I tell Ann, I said, hey, oh man, I don't know what happened. I just had this, I started crying and I'm bawling out of control. Like, what the heck? I think I broke. And she goes, I go, I don't know what that was. She goes, whoa, honey, you're traumatized. Like your body, you have been traumatized. And so I was like, oh, okay. She goes, you need therapy. I'm like, okay. Right. And so, but she planted that seed. And so for over the next couple of years, I was like, maybe I do. And I went and started visiting a therapist and I was like, hey, I don't know what's wrong with me. I feel highly functional. However, right, there's these moments when if I get vulnerable, I can lose control of my emotions. And he's like, that's okay. And I'm like, no, it's a weakness. And he's like, no, get real with yourself. Like go there. So I think that we do have to allow. So as much as we find mechanisms for managing it, right? Oh, could we go for bike rides and do yoga and find friends who are not in the fire service so we can, not always be talking about trauma. So we work on those things, but the reality is that at a certain point, you need to take care of your mental health. And I tell young firefighters, hey, go to therapy early before you think you need it, right? Just and that's like flossing your teeth. Go, you get that. Go take care of your mental health early, right? Just start proactively deconstructing some of the trauma, because the chances are you have some latent trauma that you brought with you, right, into this game, and then you're piling onto it. And we go to the firehouse and we tell jokes about dead babies and we very dark humor because that's just a way to buffer, right? But the reality is sometimes you have to be real about it and unpack it and take time away and really address those issues. So I appreciate you bringing that up because we are all affected by it. Mm-hmm. It's just at some points, at some ways we deal with it differently. PEDS codes when my kids were tiny were hard, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I'm like, that's just work. Yeah. Right. But I had to process that. I had to get there.
Oh, gotcha.
I love that. You give yourself grace for being normal mentally, right? And feeling abnormal by being normal mentally. And I love too that you brought up like mental health is a real thing and you need to invest in your mental health early and before you realize there's a problem. Just like with flossing, since you brought it up, if you keep your gums healthy, it's easy to maintain good health. But if you neglect it and you let the problem get to a certain point, there is no amount of flossing that is going to fix it anymore, ever. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse until you get further, deeper, more usually surgical and specialized intervention. And with your mental health, I have found in my own personal struggles, it's the same way. If you can keep it healthy and good and on a level, it's easy to maintain it. But if you wait until you fall off a cliff to start putting things together, it's taken me years to get back there. Yeah. And to get back there. It's taken me years to get, I guess, where I am now. Because, I fell off a cliff, but I don't think many people even know, that we need to be doing mental health hygiene. And we need to be, and what does that mean? And how does that look like for you? It's going to be different from me. And that's okay. Right. That doesn't mean I'm different or I'm abnormal, even though I might be abnormal. It doesn't mean that because of that I'm abnormal. And I think that's, as humans, a lot of times we have FOMO and it's like, well, hey, this is working for him. Why isn't this working for me? Right. And you worry like, where am I not getting it? Well, maybe that formula doesn't work for you. Yeah. And I will add too, is that we look at other people and their lives look perfect. Right. Especially in social media days and all that. We're like, wow, look they got their stuff all together, man. They got it all figured out. And the reality is that is not true. Right. But we don't know we don't see that side. And we're all so different. Right. Well, we also don't display that side either. Most of the time I don't post my mess out there for everybody. And that really is a disservice to the world. Like we really should be posting more of our real failures than just the highlight reel. And that would help everybody in the world realize, hey, my life's not so, like, I'm not such a screw up, and I can relate to and learn from this person because most of the time it's just the highlight reel and it's really hard to compete with the highlight reel. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So didn't mean to cut you off there, but no. What I was just going to say is that when we're judging other people's lives and they got it all figured out, there's a sense of insecurity that we feel, well, I clearly am
broken or weak or incapable or less than. And we're riddled with shame because of that. Yeah. And that's a problem, and it causes us to be stuck. Yes. And so the message to the world is it's okay. It's okay to be stuck and to be vulnerable and to feel crappy about things that are in your life. It's okay to be depressed and have anxiety. What's not okay is to sit in it and do nothing about it. 100%. I mean, it's your life. Do what you want. But what I would say to you is, hey man, it's okay to feel these things. What's your next right move? Yeah. What can you do next? Let's get moving. Because you don't want to sit there forever. You want to get moving if you can. And sometimes that means being incredibly vulnerable, seeking help, getting other people involved in your life, and getting those people who understand it to help you. Mm-hmm. It's tough though. It's hard.
So I've asked this question to many different public servants. I have a couple of people that are really close to me that are police officers, and asking if they would encourage their sons to go into the police force. And even fellow dentists, I've asked them, would you encourage your kids to be a dentist, knowing what you know now and these things? Would you recommend fire as fire service as a career for someone? Absolutely.
So knowing my children, no, it's not their jam, which is, so, but do I recommend this to people? Absolutely. It is a fantastic career. Now there are a tremendous amount of hazards, and those hazards are changing as we learn more about, or as modern furnishings are more made out of spun hydrocarbons. And I'll spare you the lecture on that. But
that was one thing that blew my mind. We went and visited my cousin at the fire station in Surprise, and he was like, "Yeah, this is our hazmat shower." Yeah. And I was like, "So that's when you're dealing with hazmat stuff?" He was like, "No." He's like, "We go to a fire. Yeah. We have a protocol to decontaminate ourselves from." Yeah. I was like, "Why? Why don't you just take a shower?" He's like, "Well, this is why." And he kind of started going through it. He said, in fact, there are 36 different cancers that we are specifically higher risk for as firemen.
Those are the recognized ones.
Right. That's what he said, at least as far as we know. Right.
Yeah. There's hundreds of carcinogens in the toxic gases that come off of modern furnishings. And so the reason I bring that up is the job has always been dangerous, and we are constantly evolving our technologies to try to adapt the types of the personal protective equipment, the types of things that we put in place to protect our firefighters, decon procedures, et cetera. And so we're trying to stay ahead of that. So the base function of the job remains incredibly noble, incredibly rewarding profession. It's a great career. You can make a great living for your family. The schedule can be fantastic depending on where you work, et cetera. Right? There's all these variables that are really great in the job. There are some side effects potentially. There are potential exposures to carcinogens that are rough to deal with. There's the potential that a house can fall down around your head, right, and kill you that way. Like there's these hazards. However, it is a very rewarding job. So, you have to take some of the good with the bad. So what I would say is that for anybody who's going down that path or considering it, you go to a firehouse, do a ride along, meet some firefighters, talk to them about it, get to understand what the job really is. And what I'll tell you is, it's like 95% medical. So while the 5%, 5 to 10% of the job that is the most exciting, and that can hurt you the most, right? Is the what I would consider high risk, low frequency. The bulk of the job is EMS. So you still have, there's this blend that you have to mix, right? You got to be willing to run those calls to, do lift assists and to pick people up off the toilet and, all those things that involve the medical profession. But you also have to be willing to fire it up and kick doors and, drag hose and squirt water and all that stuff too, right? That's the other side of the job that is the fun part.
Tell me about your podcast, Fireground Fitness. What were your motivations behind that?
So the Fireground Fitness podcast, the hook line is we talk about all things pertaining to life on and off the fireground. So the premise of that is, let's talk about fighting fire. Let's talk about, and it was born out of physical fitness. So back in the day, I had a blog that had a Fireground Fitness blog, and I posted workouts on there for firefighters and whatever. And it still exists. If you search it, you can still find it. It's on Blogspot. Anyway, as I grew up in my career and was finding other things to do, or finding myself less stuck at the firehouse, able to do these workouts, I got transferred to the Command Training Center. And while there, I'm listening to some of these old heads have these deep philosophical conversations about the way we do business on the fireground, et cetera. And I was like, this would make a great podcast. You guys are talking about things I've never heard before. And I've been on the job 15 years at that point, and you guys are saying things I've never heard. And so they're like, yeah, you should do that. I was like, oh, not me. No. I was a newly promoted captain. I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm scared. And so, but a few years went by, and I matured a little bit, and I was like, no, nobody's doing it. We still got to do this. And so that was really what it was born out of, was this need to further the conversation. And so I started off with some fitness related stuff, and I'm like, no, it needs to be more robust than that. We need to talk about all the things that affect firefighters: mental health, cancer prevention, the tactical components of the job. How do we do the job better? Talk about the physical fitness part of it. How do we eat better? How do we work out better? Blah, 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 all that stuff. And so it just became this kind of broad sweep of the things that affect us on the fireground.
You know what's so great too, though, is I clearly am not a firefighter, but have nothing to do with that world. But yet, even in that space, to listen to the podcast and to gain the life lessons that come from that, because it's so relatable in setting goals and in the way you view life and relating it to different aspects of your life. And so being able to take other people's experience, even though I have no idea about fires and anything like that, but to take those experiences and like, how can I relate that to myself? How can I relate that to my own life improvement and what I want to do, is so powerful to be able to take other people's experiences and relate them to yourself, and to be able to grow and find value in those things. And you do a really good job of that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Coming up on episode 100.
Yeah. So for the 100th episode, I plan on sitting down with a small panel of former guests. And the objective is we're going to listen to a variety of quotes from the previous episodes and talk about the relevance of those thoughts and ideas and premises. So It should be a fun conversation about what we're doing and where we're headed. So cool. Yeah.
I really appreciated listening. And I think one of the reasons it took me a minute to listen is I thought, this is really a fireman-centered podcast. What am I going to get out of it?
Yeah.
But as I dug in, this 4-part, a series of 4 parts on strategic decision making, right?
Yeah.
And as I was sitting there listening, and you were talking about how, like, if you have multiple battalions showing up to a fire, you have one person's like the incident commander, and then he actually helps organize. Okay, team 1, you're going to go actually fight this fire. Team 2, you're going to make sure it doesn't spread to surrounding rooms. Team 3, you're going to work on the landscape and make sure that it is clear and we're not going to get contagion out there. And then team 4, you're going to look for people inside the house and save people or something. Can't remember if that was exactly all. You had to divide it all out.
You're right. I think it's it.
But I just thought that's amazing, because if you look at the fires in your own life, right, and if you send all your resources into just putting the fire out, it's probably going to spread,
right?
And you're going to have casualties of self or conscience and decision-making abilities. And so I just kind of made me think, like, okay, I have these problems. I need a strategic plan. Yeah. And I have multiple ways to attack this plan, and these multiple things that I can do. I can, even going for a run, helps me decompress this so that I can focus more mental energy here to do this. And I love it. I thought it was super relatable. It's a real life.
So what I love about that you took away from that is so cool to me and we talk about this in the fire business, is that the strategic decision making is not just for the fireground, right? It can be applied broadly in administration, et cetera. And I get all cautious with it. I'm like, I don't want to overuse it. I go, but it starts with sizing up the situation, right? But what happens is we have a tendency to just go blowing into something, and that causes all kinds of disruption, whether it be an administrative problem or a real world problem, of fire or whatever. If you don't look at the variables that are present and assess what's happening, you're going to make some mistakes, and you're going to make the conditions potentially worse. And so slow down, size up the situation, identify all the variables that are present. What's the highest risk variable, right? And then you look at risk. What happens, on a fireground? It's, am I risking my life going in this, Or what are we risking, right? What's the level of risk? If a person's trapped, we will risk a lot to save that person. But if there's just a building that they're going to plow down next week, let's not risk anything. Let's pull back a little bit, right? So same thing when we're dealing with like problems, like a personnel problem or something in business. You go, well, hold on. What if we don't put this person on administrative leave? Are we exposing the organization to risk? Like, what did they do? Well, if he just showed up late for work, okay, go back to work, right? Show up right on the right time next time. But if we come in with a hammer every single time and go, you were late, day off without pay. What? Like that's a wrong, like you assessed way too much risk and you overloaded the problem with a response that was not commensurate with the action. So
and create unintended consequences on the other side of that.
Right.
Inappropriate response.
Yeah. And what damage does that do to the organization, the culture? And like, there's all these downstream consequences. So we have to be thoughtful and deliberate in those. So I love that you took that away from that. That's awesome.
No, it was so like I said, I thought it was awesome too.
Yeah.
It was really cool. Well, another thing I got from that, is you were talking about now, you have developed a love for travel.
Oh yeah.
And it's, in fact, you were like, it's really cool, but you hadn't been able to do that all your life.
Yeah.
Right. So, and it just made me wonder, I know as trying to balance a family and all the things, a lot of things get put on we'll do that, the someday list. Right. And for us, really travel is part of that. We're not really world travelers at all. And, looking back, would you have incorporated that sooner somehow? Would you have, can you speak to the joy of this stage of your life?
Yeah.
And then, but experiencing it, finding a way to experience that earlier on.
So you asked talking about travel, and it's interesting is I wish that Ann and I had been more brave when we were younger. And, we had no financial means. And I will say, our upbringing, both of us came from, relative, poverty, frankly. And so we had a relationship with money where we leaned a lot on scarcity, and felt scarcity throughout. And it took a long time for us to get to a point where we felt financially sound, where we're like, we're actually okay. And we're going to be fine if we spend $10,000 on a trip for ourselves, right? Like that felt like an indulgement that we couldn't afford before. And so interestingly, my wife and daughter, it started with my daughter who was like, hey, there's this HEFI program. And she's like, I want to go to India, or no, it wasn't India. Where was the first HEFI trip? It wasn't Phuket, but anyways, they went to this place in Taiwan and they did this little service trip where they traveled a little bit, but they built a school. And so we did like 3 years where Anne went as the chaperone and Echo, our daughter, went as the kid, right? As the traveler, and they fell in love with it. And I was like, no, this is okay. Like, it's okay for you guys to do that. I don't want to travel because it's just so much added expense. I just need to be at work, right? A little bit of an addiction, a little bit of a problem, but I wasn't willing to release, right? I wasn't willing to step away. And so I'm like, plus that's money well spent on you guys. Go do that. And so that set the bug. And my daughter was the one who sort of led that. And then she's like, hey, I want to go to college in Hawaii. What? Oh, that's a whole thing. And so we ended up traveling to Hawaii to go visit her at school and things like that. And so suddenly we slowly worked our way into it. And then Anne is like, hey, we're going to do a 3-week trip to Spain.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, 3 weeks? Whoa.
Yeah, what's there to do in Spain for 3 weeks?
A lot.
No, I know, but I'm saying.
But I'll tell you the trap I fell into. I was like, I can't possibly take 3 weeks off of work.
Right.
How is that possible? Well, I called my boss and I said, hey, I'm thinking about doing a trip to Spain for 3 weeks. And she says, that's great. Good for you. Awesome. I'm like, that's it? You're not worried about me being...
That's the response, huh?
You're not worried about me being gone? And she's like, no, it'll be fine. I'm like, all right. Now, and that's been a wrestle for me, right? So but I will tell you, I went, we spent 3 weeks. It was glorious. And I came back and nothing changed, right? It was all good. All good. And I came back and had these great stories to tell. The troops carried on and the mission carried on. And, it's like pulling your hand out of a bucket of water, right? Everything backfills right into that void and the work carried on. So the lesson for me was, hey, you're not so important that you can't be gone for a couple weeks, right? The folks that you have surrounding you. And if you're concerned about that, give them the knowledge, skills, and abilities to carry the work forward. You're going to be fine. It's a couple of weeks. And so that plus a little bit of financial stability really gave me the bug. And okay, we can do this.
I love it too, because it just made me think what do we tell ourselves sometimes that keep us from experiencing life where we're like, oh, nope, can't do that. There's the reason. Can't go travel for 3 weeks. They need me. But we limit our experience in life just by that thought process,
the grind.
I love that point too that you bring up, Meredith, because it's like, we can't afford to take this trip. Well, what if we take this trip, but instead of staying in the Marriott or the Hilton, what if we stay in a tent and we stay in an RV park and we limit our expenses that way, and we actually bring food and make sandwiches along the way instead of stopping fast food everywhere? Like, can we really not afford to take the trip, or are we really just not willing to see that we're able to do it? And does that limit us in doing that?
Right.
And one thing I wanted to ask you is, you said when you came back from that 3-week trip from Spain, nothing changed, but had you changed?
Well, yeah, I was ready to go world traveling.
Well, did it refresh the inner vessel though? Like, did you come back 100%. Sharper and better?
Yes.
Able to give more at work?
It's almost like a mental reset.
Yeah. I was excited to go back to work. Right. And that was a huge refreshing point. So you're absolutely right. Like, I think that there's this book by Cal Newport called Deep Work. And in that book, he talks about setting apart specific time to work. Right. But like, you can't work 80 hours a week and expect that you're really going to be productive. Right. But if you say, hey, I'm going to close my door and work for 4 hours on a project, that's going to be quality time. And I think, and then saying, hey, I'm going to be off work, right? And no contact for this amount of time. That is huge, because like you said, you have to recharge the vessel. It's so important, especially when we talk about mental health and all the other stuff. Like, the lie that we tell ourselves is that we have time. Right. And the reality is that we do not have time. Mm-hmm. It is this life is quite short. And if you want to experience different things, you have to seize these things, these opportunities, and go and do stuff. One
of the only resources you cannot get back. Right. You cannot make it up, and you can't find it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Nobody can give you theirs. It's.
Yeah.
And you also don't know how much you have.
Right. You don't know when they're coming for you.
Yeah. Totally. One of the most frustrating things for me in the early part of my career, starting the practices and all the stress, all the financial burden and pressure, and paying everybody else and not having much for yourself after you pay all the bills, and then the government still wants you to pay taxes on other people's wages and property and stuff you're buying. And I mean, you can't go to the store without paying tax. Don't get me started on that. But, somebody told me, hey, Lonnie, you got to learn to enjoy the journey. I looked at them and I thought, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. In fact, I said, all right, well, tell me this. When you're driving to the beach, do you enjoy the drive or do you enjoy the beach? And she was like, I actually really enjoy the drive. I was like, what?
Weirdo.
What?
That's not true.
She's like, in fact, I know the drive is going to be 6 hours long. And so I think, how can I enjoy that 6 hours that I'm going to be spending either by myself or with friends? And how can we make the drive special? It's like, yeah, you do need to enjoy the drive, Lonnie. That's what I'm telling you. And I was like, wow.
Right. Put some good tunes on, eat some good snacks.
Yeah. It was mind blowing for me. So, taking time to smell the roses along the way in your life and living your life, probably before you think, hey, this is time for me to live my life.
Right.
Making sure that you show up and live.
Right.
While you're going through everything you're going through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard. And it's hard to gain that perspective, I think. So I think that's why it's important that we're having this conversation, saying it out loud, and giving voice to it, because so many people are sitting there not realizing how much is slipping away from them right now. Right. And it's, it can be as simple as like, well, I'm going to do a staycation, or I'm going to you don't have to travel the world necessarily. Start with traveling Arizona. You know how many people don't go to the Grand Canyon, for example?
This couple hasn't really been to the Grand Canyon.
Right in this room. Perfect point.
Right. Arizona natives.
I
went once when I was like 6, and I remember this is my memory of the Grand Canyon. I remember wanting to go look over the edge. I remember trying to get as close as I can. I remember my parents yelling at me and even spanking me a little bit because I kept trying to get to the edge. They're like, you're going to fall off the edge. You're going to get too close. I never saw anything. But I remember that I was safe.
So we did a trip to the Grand Canyon, and while we were at the bottom, the park ranger was doing a little thing for the kids. We took our kids when they were like 7 and 8. And he said, millions of people come to the park every year. Less than 1% ever come to the bottom.
Wow.
And I was like, whoa, we are rare air right now. This is great. So I guess I just think about like, what can we do locally, right? Like if you can't, if you're not ready to be gone. So I started running ultra marathons back in the day when the kids were little, because I was like, training for a triathlon, too much time away. I go, but I need to go into the backcountry. I need that. That's where I find myself closer to God when I am on top of mountains or in the backcountry. That's my space. Yeah. And so I'm like, I got to go away and travel into the woods. And so I'm like, how do I do that? Well, let's go for a 50-mile trail. And well, that takes a week to backpack 50 miles. I go, but if I run it in a weekend, I can see the whole trail. And so that was my justification, right, for these painful endeavors that I took. But for me, it was, I need that getaway. I'm going to go spend 12 to 15 hours on a trail in my head away from all of life, right? Because nothing, when you're just hiking, nothing else matters, right? You're only in that space. And that's, one of the ways that I decompress from life and from work. And when you think about that in terms of like traveling, like it's kind of the same thing. Like I am going to separate myself from my normal daily life and really create some space to reflect. And I will tell you that Ann and I find ourselves way more connected when we get away from the daily grind and just spend that time together. As much as paying bills together, makes you close.
Fabulous.
How fun that is. I do have one more question I wanted to ask. And how has your faith sustained you through all this? And how important has it been in getting you to this point in your life?
So, it's a tough question for me lately because I've really been in a bit of a deconstruction in the last little while. But what I will tell you is that understanding or having a feeling that I understand the big picture when it comes to dealing with trauma and dealing with life's difficulties, it helps me understand that there's more to all this than we can possibly understand. And so my narrow little myopic focus is a trap, right? So I realize, hey, you got to get outside of yourself and think more broadly and think big picture. And while you may not know everything, you know enough to know that there's more than what meets the eye. And that helps me get through the little struggles because they're little struggles in terms of the big picture. So that's what helps me.
I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. And I hang on a quote. I actually pulled my phone up and looked at it real quick because I want to remind myself of this quote. But Musashi, he says, when you know the way broadly, you see it in all things. And so I think about trying to maintain this broad understanding and applying it in our daily lives, right? Just when little things are happening, I'm like, okay, what's happening big picture? Is this really critical? Is it the most important thing? Or look at the big picture and go, it's going to be fine.
Yeah. Reminded me of the way you want directions. Like, so when we're going somewhere, like you pull up directions and I'll pull up maps and whatever we got to go in and he gets mad because he wants to see the big picture first. He wants the overview of like all the freeways and how we're going to get there and make sure we're good. And then we can go back to the other.
That's right. You got to know, you got to see the big picture.
Got to have the big picture. Yeah. Yep. It's good. It's practical.
Very good. Well, Rayne, I've really loved this time that we've been able to share with you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm super happy to be here. Thank you.
I really think, like I told Justin a minute ago, you and I could probably talk all day. And I don't know if it'd be to the viewers best interest or that we bore him to death. But you're fantastic. So many life stories and so many life lessons that I really appreciate you sharing, and it's so relatable. Guys, really go check out his podcast, Fireground Fitness. You don't have to be a fireman to gain great insight into your own lives there. And there is tactical information. It is fun to hear about the fire stories, though. Those are really cool because you don't hear a lot of those stories either. But also there's tactical information I took away from it every episode that I listened to, and how to make my life better and how to improve myself. So make sure you check out Fireground Fitness. And we also this time invite you to do your part. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If you enjoyed this content in this episodes, we know that your family and friends will as well. And we encourage you to look forward to next time when you tune into a great episode of the Value Script.